Greetings from the Brain Gauge channel. I'm Mark Charmerdahl, and I want to talk to you about reaction time. So let's get started. And I'm going to give you a short version and a long version. So if you're okay with just watching the short version, this will be real quick, and you'll get all the information you need to know in one slide. So brain gauge and reaction time. What are the important points? Brain gauge system is a computerized cognitive assessment aid. And there are a lot of those systems in that category. And the one thing that they do have in common, just about all of them collect reaction time. And so that's the one measure that we can, accurately compare and rigorously compare reaction time from the brain gauge system to the reaction time to other systems that are out there. The other systems rely on consumer grade technology. And this is because of all the latencies inherent in that. It's like you go and you get a computer and whatever software is loaded up, it was not designed for scientific studies or research studies, and it's got tons of latencies in it. Those machines are not calibrated, and they have latencies in the 80 to 400 millisecond range, so it doesn't mean anything to you yet. Brain gauge relies on laboratory grade equipment. This is equipment that we built from the ground up and is housed in that computer mouse sized device that you've seen. Latency of 0.3 milliseconds. So if you don't know, 0.3, that's a pretty small error. 80 to 400, big error. Normal reaction time is in the 200 to 220 millisecond range. And if you add 80 milliseconds to that, it's an error of greater than 30%. And that's what a lot of people do. And it's not just that you have this latent error added on by this stuff because you think, okay, I can test here and then, but it's going to be, let's say it's 100 milliseconds off and it's 100 milliseconds off. Well, it's not consistent. So, you might test yourself on another system every day. That means the error can be anywhere from 100 to 400 milliseconds, or you test yourself on one system and then go and do the same tests another place. There's a lot of variability and it's inaccurate. Normal reaction time variability, which is a very good measure, and it's a actually much more sensitive than reaction time. It's in the 5 to 20 millisecond range. So 80 milliseconds of variability just pretty much makes that measure useless. So, and reaction time is very sensitive to a wide range of neurological disruptions and disorders and insults. And this has been going on in the literature for a long, long time. People have been doing studies forever. Reaction time variability is even more sensitive, particularly to things like focus. And I'll talk about that in the longer version of the talk. The brain gauge is the only commercial system out there that can accurately measure it. Now, I've had students build stuff for class that could do it, but still, you can build stuff on your own, or you can spend about the same amount of money and get a brain gauge, or probably spend even less money, but I'm not here to advertise. Let's keep it G-rated. You can't make chicken salad out of chicken blank. You fill in the blank. But a lot of people keep trying, particularly a lot of researchers. You have all these errors, and these people are kind of knuckleheads, to be quite frank. I mean, they keep saying, oh no, look, we're going to collect data from 5,000 people, and we're going to show that there's a difference between these two populations. And if they collect enough data, yeah, they can average out those errors. Well, we designed the brain gauge so that you could use it on one person at a time, not so that we could, support this research, academic research industry. And I've been part of that academic research industry, by the way, but that's a whole nother story. If you want to hear more about that, go to Grumpy Science and hear Bob Dennis and I talk about it. Okay, if that's good enough for you, stop watching. Otherwise, you're getting the long version. Here's the long version, and it's actually pretty good. Okay, so first, let's look at history of reaction time measures. So how do we read this graph? This graph, 1850, that's the year 1850 up to 2050. We're not there yet, but who knows what's going to happen once we get there. But what this is, these are average reaction times obtained from publications, peer-reviewed publications from, over the last 150 plus years. So what we did was, we went into the literature and found all these papers that dated back, and we just took all the ones we could find where people were testing healthy, what they called healthy controls, and we looked at, what was the reaction time reported, and it could be visual, which is a blue dot, auditory, or tactile. And so we said, okay, up until about right here, around 1970, we start seeing in the literature, you start seeing things drift up and get slower and slower. Now, there were some people who wrote papers. I won't give you his name because it was really a terrible paper, because he was claiming that we were getting dumber as a population, and that's really not true. I mean, he basically said, this was back in 2012, where they first noticed this trend, and he said they actually did something of the same thing. They extracted reaction times from not nearly as many papers as we did, but said, oh, reaction time is getting slower. And because reaction time is related to intelligence, we're getting dumber as a population. And, he started making this argument, and he made it strong enough that a lot of people started a flurry of 2 or 3 researchers, other research groups, doing some studies to prove that no, we, going in a roundabout way, showing that we actually weren't getting dumber. Well, where we 1970 was the introduction of personal computers. And along with that introduction of personal computers was also the introduction of sloppy science. My gosh, in the 1970s, we went to the moon with slide rules, and very exact. But personal computers, not scientific experimental computers, and hardware and software search during that time, and calibrating machines to very carefully collect data. I was part of that group. There were still numbers that were drifting up, were the result of people using non-laboratory grade equipment. As basically what was going on. So that there was this long upward trend, even though, okay, that's our hypothesis, right? And actually then we published a paper. And what did we do for that paper? Well, we decided to, how about if we just look at these systems, people are using, again, visual, auditory, tactile stimuli, but how are they collecting data? Are they just using a personal computer? And the methods sections of some of these papers are, we used a personal computer to collect reaction time. No, and that's it. That was their entire method. Not very scientific. They didn't have dedicated circuitry, which had 0.1 millisecond accuracy or anything like that. They had circuitry that had, well, not very good. So we published a paper. What we did was we decided to measure the accuracy of these different systems to measure reaction time. And in order to eliminate human variability, we tested these systems robotically. In other words, we took out all the human element. Now, we actually saw some people trying to, doing this differently, and they were like, oh, they went and they tested visual and auditory and tactile, and they said, oh, visual systems are slower. And it's like, actually, they're not. That the biological visual system is slower, and it really isn't. If you use accurate methods, you'll find that they're all the same. I mean, if you think about it this way, if your visual system is a lot slower than your auditory system, and if it's slower than your tactile system, then all the images around you would be incoherent. If you look at a dog barking, or you would hear the bark before you see him actually move his mouth. But anyway, let's look at the results. So this is the trial by trial response of what we were looking at. And, in this, just to, basically, this is the raw data. And these are the different systems that we're looking at. And one of the systems was visual reaction time with a touch screen. Then we looked at visual reaction time where something's flashed up on the screen and you respond with a USB bounce. And again, this was with robotics using visual detection and, all automated. And the response was all automated. And so your actual error should be 0. Humans, you would see this kind of look like a lot of variability. But when you measure the latency, this is just showing, this is actually just showing the variability around the response. So you're getting this wide range of variability. But the average latency for the visual reaction time with a touchscreen response, 400 milliseconds. And if you think back to that first figure I showed you, things are drifting up to about 400, 500, and so that's 400 milliseconds is what you would add to the your actual reaction time. So if your actual reaction time is 200 milliseconds and you take something with a touch screen on a visual reaction time, you might get something as slow as 600 milliseconds. Visual reaction time with the USB mouse, we flash it on the screen and you respond. Latency there about 80 milliseconds. This is what's normally used in a lot of systems. Brain gauge reaction time with a mouse response. That means using the brain gauge and then hitting the button on the mouse. You get a react. That's in the 15 to 20 millisecond range. And then brain gauge reaction time, that latency is 0.3 milliseconds. Look at it another way. This is the variability that you get from these systems, not the actual latency, but the variability of each of those. So that first system that was so bad, 80 millisecond variability, 40 milliseconds from, again, the standard visual reaction time. And again, what I mentioned before in a summary slide was that, yeah, you can do studies, and let's say you take a couple of hundred or a couple of thousand people, you just keep upping the number, and you say, okay, let's compare concussed versus non-concussed people. And you find out, okay, well, concussed people have a slightly higher average variability than non-concussed. And if you're using a system like this, you're going to have to collect data from a whole lot of people now to actually show that difference. Well, that's just kind of, and the thing is, if you have an accurate system of measurement, you don't need that many people to show that difference. So we have 0.3 milliseconds here in our dedicated response from the brain gauge. That's because the brain gauge has all the timing hardware inside it and housed inside it. So that's basically what we're looking at is this is a normative variability. So if you're normal, if you were to take the test and you're relatively healthy, you're going to be in that 5 to 20 millisecond range. And then let's say you bang your head or, have a really bad day, your variability might go up to 30 or 40 milliseconds. Well, if you're using a system that has a variability of 40 milliseconds, it's not going to work. It's like measuring it's like making a teaspoon measure with a gallon jug. It just doesn't work. Okay. But, I guess I'm fairly passionate about this topic because so many people just don't get it. And they're still making this mistake. And now that paper came out, they're angry. So anyway, so let's go back to this slide. And the summary is that people are just really getting kind of stupid. I mean, they're basically, when our paper came out, I guess almost 2 years ago, this November, when our paper came out, we thought, maybe people would start changing their way. And we actually weren't the first people to report on this. A guy named Richard Plant did back in, I believe, 2009, saw the trend and he reported that. People don't care. It's like they don't understand how important it is to have scientifically accurate systems. And, it's really sad because I spent hours, as a graduate student, postdoc, calibrating equipment to make accurate measurements in the lab. And now, people just say, oh, I got a computer, I can just collect reaction time. And what do? They collect crappy data. And, that really doesn't work. So basically, we're just getting dumber about our practices. And this isn't really reversing. We thought that when we published this paper, maybe we'd have an impact. And actually, the people using the brain gauge were pretty happy about the paper. And there are a lot of researchers using the brain gauge. But the people not using the brain gauge, the people who have been publishing this stuff, and by the way, to put them in, one of them was they were in the 1 to 2 second range. How can you have a reaction time of 2 seconds or 1.5 seconds? You're going to die anytime you try to cross the street if your reaction time is that slow. You won't function in the environment very well if you're that if you have that slow reaction time. So next time you try to react to something, before you react, count yourself 1 Mississippi, 2, and then say, oh, that's slow. That's what we're talking about, is that people are really, really kind of slow to pick up on this, is that they're, and the thing that's really important, number one, you can't compare any of these studies, the studies that are delivering this crappy data, you can't compare that to anything. I mean, because they're using garbage in, garbage out. So take a look at the brain gauge measures. Reaction time comes up as speed. And what exactly do changes in reaction time do? So factors that, there's a lot of things in the literature that have shown, again, that have shown in some of these papers we took part in and were collected with our methods, factors that increase reaction time: TBI or concussion, diabetes, dementia, Alzheimer's, ADHD, different types of drug use, autism, Tourette's, alcohol consumption, Parkinson's, insomnia, developmental disorders. Well, autism is a developmental disorders, but the other ones too. There's quite a few. Now, factors that make reaction time faster: fasting and exercise. So any kind of thing that makes you better physically tends to make, like, acute and physical exercise both make you a little bit better. Caffeine intake, that's another one. And that's kind of a, I'll come back to that in a minute. But then all these other things, omega-3 intake, Tai Chi, these are papers. Now, just because these are on the things are on the list doesn't mean they're the only things that aren't on the list. I mean, I can think of one. I just looked at a paper the other day and I forgot to put it up here. But one thing that makes you worse is the volume of music in your car. Crank the music up higher, your reaction time gets slower. Yeah, not a good thing. All right. But all these things, do make you, have been shown in the literature to get you faster. My favorite, electroshock feedback. And that's like the opening scene of Ghostbusters. If you're not fast enough, you get shocked. And, of course, that was done in the 1970s, and I'm not sure you're allowed to do that anymore. But keep in mind that an increase in reaction time will cause the brain gauge speed score to be worse for those of you using the brain gauge. Obviously, a decrease in reaction time is what you want. And so what you're shooting for is, what's the optimum? So are you doing some kind of dosimetry? And reaction time goes up, it starts out high, and you do something on this list to decrease reaction time. And I know a lot of people have tried this anecdotally, where they take a little bit of caffeine, they get a little bit faster. They take way too much caffeine, they get slower. So, that's really not a good thing. So now we're going to talk about reaction time variability. What is reaction time variability? And when you get a reaction time, take a reaction time test, you take it multiple times. And, let's say, and on the brain gauge, it pops up, each time you take the test, it tells you what your score is. And so you react, and it might be 200 milliseconds. And if it's 200 every single time, then your reaction time variability is low, because it didn't vary. I've seen a reaction time variability of 0 one time. That's really, really rare. So, don't feel bad if you don't get a reaction time variability of 0. Nobody does. But most people are in that 5 to 20 millisecond range. Now, let's say, you go and you take the test and you're having a bad day, or you're distracted and people walking in and out of the room, dishes dropping, loud noises, everything. Or you just got other issues, you got whacked in the head. Your first trials, you hit 200, it's like, oh, reaction time's still normal. Then you go to 220, then 180, 220, 240, 160, whatever. So that, that's around, that would be about a reaction time variability about 20, where it swings about 20 milliseconds to either side of what your average is. And, what we see with, say, ADHD in kids, it's around 100 milliseconds. So it should way up there for ADHD in adolescents. But, we see mild concussion, it usually goes up to about 30 or 40. Oh, by the way, not detectable by other systems. So you don't even hear other people talk about that. They might do a study where they've done lots of averaging to get that number out of a couple of thousand subjects. But have you ever been to the doctor and he says, okay, I'm going to take these measures and I'm going to collect data from another 200 patients, and then I'll get back to you to say which group you sort of fell in line with. That's insane. Use the brain gauge and you find your reaction time variability right away. Now, what is reaction time variability good for? An increase in RTV means that the brain gauge focus score will get worse. So you want low variability. But there's a lot of things that increase reaction time variability or make your focus score worse. Loss of focus or attention is one of them. Again, a lot of noise, a lot of distractions, or just inability to attend that stimulus. And if you can't stay on task, then your reaction time variability is going to be high and your focus score is going to be poor. And so here's a whole list of different things that have been showed again in the literature. But you can find out on your own what impacts you and your reaction time variability. You just get a brain gauge and look. So if you have any questions, or if of any kind, and you want to hear me talk some more, or if you don't want to hear me talk some more, you can go and you can read about it. There's lots of information on the Cortical Metrics website, but you can email me at corticalmetrics.com. Thanks for listening, and hope you have a great day.